I never imagined that the worst moment of my life, the moment I felt like discarded trash, worthless and broken, would be the exact bridge leading me to the woman who would change my existence and my definition of love forever. If you believe that fate writes straight with crooked lines, and you love stories of resilience and intense romance, subscribe to Forbidden Romances so you don't miss a single chapter of my journey. My name is Kayla. I am 25 years old, and until that fateful day, I was merely a shadow of myself. I was a small-town girl from West Virginia trying to survive in Boston, carrying the weight of a body society judges and a heart shattered into a million pieces. I didn't know it then, but as I walked up the steep driveway of that elite neighborhood in Beacon Hill, I was walking toward my salvation. It all started with the end, or what I thought was the end of my emotional life, when Derek broke up with me in the cruelest way possible. For 2 years, I gave him everything, accepting crumbs of affection and listening to veiled insults about my appearance, how my clothes didn't fit right, or how I needed to lose weight to look good standing next to him. When he walked out, taking not just his things but my entire self-esteem, I found myself alone in that cramped apartment with the rent overdue and a hollow feeling that was almost physical, like a hole in my chest. I needed money fast. I needed to keep my mind busy, and most importantly, I needed to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet, even if my legs were shaking with fear. In that state of desperation, a home care agency called with an offer that seemed too good to be true, at least financially. The pay was nearly triple what I usually made caring for the elderly, but the recruiter was blunt. The position had been open for months because no one lasted more than a week. The patient was a wealthy, independent woman who was, according to the rumors, impossible to deal with. Someone who refused help and made a point of humiliating anyone who tried to get close. I swallowed hard, looked at the past due electric and water bills on my shaky kitchen table, and said I'd take the challenge. Necessity has a much louder voice than fear. On the day of the interview, which was also my first trial day, I woke up early and spent hours in front of the mirror trying to hide the dark circles from crying all night. I chose my best outfit, black slacks and a light blouse that didn't cling to my curves, trying to look as professional and invisible as possible. I felt inadequate. I always did, as if I took up too much space in the world. The thought of entering the home of a high society woman put a lump in my throat. I took 2 crowded subways until I reached the upscale area, watching the scenery change from the peeling paint of the outskirts to the imposing mansions surrounded by manicured lawns and silence. When I stepped off at the final stop, the air felt crisper, smelling of salt and old money from the nearby harbor, but my stomach was in knots. I walked to the address on the paper, stopping in front of a massive black iron gate protecting a house that looked like a fortress of glass and concrete. I pressed the intercom with a sweaty hand, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, secretly hoping no one would answer so I could go back to my safe bed. But the gate opened with an electric buzz, inviting me into a world that didn't belong to me. And I took a deep breath, asking God for the strength to handle whatever was coming. The inside of the house was even more intimidating, with a gigantic double-height ceiling and furniture that looked like untouched works of art. Everything very clean, cold, and silent. A serious housekeeper, who didn't smile once, received me and guided me down the wide hallways, where my cheap shoes made a clacking sound that echoed embarrassingly. I felt small in there, an intruder in that temple of wealth and solitude, and I started regretting accepting this madness before I even met the boss. The smell of the house was a mixture of fresh flowers, with an undertone of expensive cleaning products, an aroma that screamed perfection, something I was very far from being. We reached the door of the master bedroom, which was ajar, and the housekeeper signaled for me to enter alone, as if she herself was afraid to cross that border. My hands were trembling slightly when I pushed the solid wood and took the first step inside the room, which was dim, with heavy curtains drawn blocking the morning sun. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust to the low light, and then I saw her, sitting in a velvet armchair near the window, motionless as a statue, Veronica Lucero was nothing like I had imagined. She didn't look like a frail or sick old lady. On the contrary, her presence filled the entire room. She was a stunning black woman, with skin that seemed to glow even in the dark and long wavy hair falling over her shoulders with natural elegance. Even wearing a silk robe and with a cane leaning next to her, she exuded power and authority, the posture of someone used to giving orders and being obeyed without question. She didn't turn when I entered. She continued staring at nothing, or perhaps at some fixed point in her thoughts, completely ignoring my presence standing there at the door. I cleared my throat, trying to make some sound come out, but my voice failed, trapped in the fear of disturbing that aura of a wounded queen she projected. I took 2 more timid steps into the room, trying not to make noise, but the hardwood floor creaked under my weight, betraying my lack of grace. That was when she turned her face slowly in my direction, and I was met with the most intense and piercing eyes I had ever seen in my life. There was no sweetness in them, just a cold and cutting analysis, as if she were dissecting me and finding all my flaws in a matter of seconds. I felt naked, exposed, ashamed of my body, my simple clothes, and my messy life, all under the scrutiny of that powerful woman. "Good morning, Ms. Veronica," I finally managed to whisper, my voice shaky, trying to maintain a professional smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm Kayla, the new caregiver sent by the agency." She didn't answer immediately, just kept staring at me with an indecipherable expression, her fingers drumming impatiently on the arm of the chair. The silence stretched for too long, becoming almost unbearable, heavy, charged with a tension that made the air thick. I wanted to run. I wanted to apologize for existing and leave, but I remembered the bills. I remembered Derek saying I was a failure, and I planted my feet on the ground. "You are very young," she said finally, and her voice was deep, velvety, but with a tone of disdain that hit me like a slap. "And you look scared. If you think you're going to last here with that crying face, girl, you better turn around right now. I don't need a babysitter, and certainly not someone I have to console." Those harsh words confirmed all the warnings I had received. But strangely, instead of making me cry, they lit a spark of stubbornness inside me. I took a deep breath, swallowing the urge to break down, and held her gaze, realizing that behind that armor of arrogance, there was a deep pain she was trying to hide at all costs. I didn't know it yet, but that first confrontation would be just the beginning of a daily battle, and I would have to be much stronger than I imagined to tear down the walls Veronica Lucero had built around her heart. That first day dragged on, as if hours had lead weights tied to the clock hands, every minute testing my patience and my will to simply grab my purse and run back to my broke reality. After that initial clash, where Ms. Veronica made it clear I wasn't welcome, the housekeeper left the room silently, closing the door and leaving me alone in the lion's den. The air conditioning was set to such a low temperature that I felt goosebumps on my arms, but I didn't dare ask to change it, as I knew that cold was just a reflection of the emotional environment she made a point of maintaining. I stayed in a corner, trying to be invisible, watching as she flipped through a thick book with an expression of boredom and pain, as if every movement cost her precious energy. The first real battle happened at medication time, just before lunch, when I needed to approach that human fortress to offer the pills that were on the silver tray on the dresser. My hands were sweating cold as I separated the colorful pills and filled a glass with fresh water, feeling her gaze burning into my back like a laser. I took 3 deep breaths, a technique I learned to control anxiety when Derek yelled at me, and walked to the armchair where she reigned supreme. I extended the tray as delicately as possible, trying not to show how intimidated I was, but she didn't even deign to look at me or the medicine. "I'm not taking that right now," she said firmly, without taking her eyes off the page of the book, as if I were an annoying mosquito buzzing around her. "You can take that tray away and leave me alone, girl." "You need to take it, Ms. Veronica. It's for the pain and circulation," I insisted, my voice coming out lower than I would have liked, but firm enough to show I was doing my job. Doctor's orders, and if you don't take it, you'll feel more discomfort later. She closed the book with a dry thud that made me jump slightly, and finally turned her face to me, her eyes flashing a contained anger that made me want to shrink. She analyzed me up and down again, lingering her gaze on my simple clothes and my body that didn't fit the standards of that architectural digest house. I felt my face heat up with shame, that old feeling of inadequacy rising in my throat. But I kept the tray extended, my hands trembling slightly under the weight of her judgment. "Do you think you can come into my house, into my bedroom, and tell me what I should or shouldn't do?" she asked, her voice dripping with irony and disdain. "Look at you. You can barely hold that tray without shaking. You must be used to taking care of senile old folks who accept anything, but I am not one of them. I am the owner of my life and my body, and I take what I want, when I want." That hurt. It hurt because it touched the wound of my professional and personal insecurity. But at the same time, I noticed something in her voice that wasn't just arrogance. There was exhaustion. There was immense frustration from someone who had always been in control of everything and now found herself dependent on pills and strangers to live. I remembered how I felt when I couldn't pay my bills, that powerlessness that turns into anger. And by a miracle, compassion spoke louder than my fear. I didn't respond to the provocation. I didn't lower my head, and I didn't apologize. I just took a step forward, minimally invading her personal space. "I'm not here to boss you around, Ms. Veronica. I'm here to help you regain that control you value so much," I said, surprising myself with the courage of those words. "If you take the medicine, the pain decreases, and without pain, you go back to being in charge of everything faster. I need this job, and you need to get better. We can collaborate, or we can stay in this war all day, but I am stubborn." She stared at me in silence for long seconds, and I saw genuine surprise pass through her eyes, as if no one had dared to speak to her like that in a long time. The atmosphere in the room became tense, heavy, like a rubber band stretched to the max about to snap, and I held my breath, expecting to be fired right there. But instead of yelling, she let out a long sigh, momentarily defeated by logic, or perhaps by the exhaustion of the pain she must have been feeling. She extended her perfectly manicured hand, took the small cup with the pills, and swallowed them all at once, without water, in a brusque gesture of defiance. "You talk too much," she grumbled, putting the cup back on the tray with force. "Now get out of my face before I change my mind about your staying in this house." I walked away from her with shaky legs, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion, as if I had just run an emotional marathon. The rest of the afternoon followed in that rhythm of silent tension, where every interaction was a minefield I needed to cross carefully. I helped her to the bathroom, and it was the only time I saw her physical fragility exposed, the difficulty in steadying her leg, the grimace of pain she tried to hide by biting her lip. I wanted to offer my arm. I wanted to be the support. But she repelled any touch that wasn't strictly necessary, erecting walls of ice around herself. When night fell, bringing shadows to that huge room, I was sitting in the corner, exhausted, hungry, and with an aching longing for my bed, as bad as it was. Veronica was already lying down, turned to the other side, pretending to sleep. Or maybe actually sleeping. I couldn't tell. The silence of the house was absolute, oppressive, different from the constant noise of the street where I lived, and that increased my feeling of loneliness. I thought about Derek, about his cruel words, and looked at that powerful and broken woman in the bed, realizing that money didn't shield anyone from suffering. That was when I heard a muffled sound, something low and rhythmic coming from the bed, and it took me a few seconds to understand what it was. It wasn't snoring. It wasn't heavy breathing. It was crying. A contained cry, suffocated in the pillow. The sound of someone who doesn't allow themselves to break down in front of anyone. My heart squeezed in my chest, a painful empathy taking over me, and I had the impulse to get up and go over there. But I remained seated, my hands clutching the fabric of my pants, understanding that was a sacred moment of vulnerability she didn't want to share. I stayed there in the dark, guarding the sleep and tears of that stranger, feeling that, in some strange and twisted way, our pains were starting to converse in the silence of that mansion. And little did I know that that hidden crying was just the tip of the iceberg, and that the next day I would discover that her armor had cracks where, maybe, just maybe, I could get in. The following days dragged on in a routine that tested every fiber of my patience and self-esteem, transforming that luxurious mansion into a gilded cage where I constantly walked on eggshells. If the first encounter was a shock, daily life revealed itself as an exercise in silent humiliation, where Ms. Veronica made a point of building an insurmountable wall of coldness between us. She didn't yell, which might have been easier to deal with, but she used silence and looks of contempt as weapons, making me feel invisible, as if I were just another piece of furniture in that immense house. But an unwanted and clumsy piece of furniture. The worst part of the day, without a doubt, was bath time. A sacred hour of forced intimacy that exposed all the fragility she tried to hide under the pose of an iron woman. The first time I had to help her into the shower was marked by tension so dense it seemed to steal the oxygen from the white marble bathroom. I saw her body tremble, not from cold, but from a contained rage at having to undress in front of a stranger, revealing the scars the accident had left on her leg and her pride. I tried to be fast and respectful, keeping my gaze focused on the soap or sponge, avoiding staring at the marks that told the story of her pain, but I felt the weight of her judgment on my every move. "Careful with that water, girl. Do you want to scald me?" she complained one morning, her voice echoing off the tiled walls, even though the temperature was warm and pleasant. God, it's so hard to find someone competent these days. It seems like you do everything with ill will. I swallowed the response burning in my throat, remembering the overdue bills I needed to pay and the fact that I had nowhere to go if I lost that job. I just adjusted the temperature millimetrically, apologizing softly, and continued to sponge her back, feeling the stiffness of her muscles under my touch. It was strange touching the skin of someone so powerful and feeling that, there, naked and wet, she was just a frightened and wounded human being, fighting to maintain dignity while needing help for the most basic act of hygiene. The smell of French lavender soap mixed with the hot steam created a suffocating atmosphere, and sometimes, amidst the steam, our eyes met in the foggy mirror. In those brief seconds, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't anger, but deep panic, the fear of never again being the independent woman she once was. I looked away quickly, respecting that moment of weakness, and helped her dry off with plush towels that felt like hugs she refused to receive from anyone. After the bath came the battle to dress her, where she rejected almost all the clothes I suggested, criticizing my simple taste and demanding pieces that were easy to put on but maintained her elegance. I felt like a rag doll being manipulated, running from one side of the gigantic closet to the other to satisfy whims that, deep down, I knew were just a way for her to exert some control over the situation. When she was finally ready, sitting in the armchair by the window, exhausted by the effort, silence returned to reign, heavy and accusing. My meals were eaten in the kitchen, alone, under the watchful eye of the housekeeper, who seemed to disapprove of my presence as much as the boss. The food was delicious, made by a talented cook, but it went down hard, mixed with the bitter taste of loneliness and longing for a life that, even if imperfect, was mine. I would grab my cell phone and look at old photos with Derek, feeling a pang of pain in my chest, remembering how I nullified myself to fit into his world, and realized with horror that I was doing the same thing there in that house, shrinking myself so as not to bother anyone. On a particularly difficult afternoon, Ms. Veronica decided she wanted to try walking in the garden, something the physical therapist had recommended, but she had been putting off for weeks. I prepared everything, checked the path to ensure there were no obstacles, and offered my arm to serve as support, as I was taught. She looked at my extended arm with disdain, huffed in irritation, and tried to get up alone, leaning all her weight on the dark wood cane with excessive force. "I don't need you to carry me. I'm not an invalid," she hissed, taking the first uncertain steps toward the balcony door. "Stay behind me, in case I need you, but don't touch me unless I ask." I obeyed, walking 2 steps behind her like a shadow, my heart in my mouth every time she swayed or stumbled on her own weakened legs. The afternoon sun hit her face, revealing expression lines marked by bitterness, and I caught myself thinking how someone could have so much money and be so miserable inside. Watching her fight against her own body caused me a confused mix of pity and admiration, because despite the rudeness, there was an undeniable strength in that woman, an obstinate refusal to accept defeat. Halfway down the cobblestone path, the tip of her cane slipped into a crack, and she lost her balance abruptly, letting out a stifled scream of fright. Before I could think, my instinct acted faster than her orders. I lunged forward and grabbed her by the waist, bracing my body against hers to stop the fall. For an instant, we were glued together, me smelling her expensive perfume and feeling the heat of her trembling body, and her clutching my shoulders tightly, her panting breath hitting my face. Time seemed to stop in that silent garden, with only the sound of birds and our uneven breathing filling the air. I expected her to push me away and yell at me for disobeying, for touching her without permission. But she didn't move immediately. She stayed there, leaning on me, her black eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my legs shake. Not from fear this time, but from something I couldn't name. "You have a heavy hand, girl," she murmured finally, composing herself and pulling away slowly, but without the usual aggression in her voice. "But at least you have quick reflexes. Don't think this changes anything." She straightened her clothes with dignity, picked up the cane that had fallen on the ground, and continued the walk, but I noticed, or wanted to notice, that her shoulders were less tense. We went back to the room in silence, but the air seemed to have changed, become less thin, as if that brief physical contact had created a micro crack in the wall of ice. That night, while I tried to sleep in the maid's room at the back of the house, I stared at the ceiling, reliving the sensation of her body against mine, not knowing that that little incident in the garden would be the first step to tearing down defenses not only hers, but mine too. The fragile peace I was beginning to build in that house of glass and silence was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon, proving that ghosts of the past don't respect new addresses or maximum security gates. I was in the kitchen finishing preparing Ms. Veronica's afternoon tea, trying not to make noise with the fine porcelain cups, when the intercom rang with a shrill sound that sounded like a fire alarm in the middle of that calm. My heart leaped in my chest, a bad premonition freezing my spine even before the housekeeper answered the device with her usual expression of displeasure. "I wasn't expecting visitors, Ms." Veronica received no one, and the world outside seemed very distant from that bubble of air conditioning and expensive furniture where I was hiding. The housekeeper frowned as she listened to the voice on the other end of the line, her eyes narrowing and shifting to me with a mix of judgment and irritation that made me want to disappear. She slammed the phone onto the hook with unnecessary force and crossed her arms, saying there was a man at the gate demanding to speak to me, and that he seemed agitated and not at all presentable for that neighborhood. The name Derek didn't need to be said to echo in my head like thunder. I knew it was him, felt it in my knotted stomach and in my hands that began to shake uncontrollably, dropping a silver spoon on the floor. I apologized, stumbling over my words, feeling bile rise in my throat, and said I would resolve it immediately, silently begging for the owner of the house not to hear the commotion. Walking from the kitchen to the main gate was the longest walk of my life, every step weighing a ton, while the fear of losing my job mixed with the physical dread I had of him. The sun was setting, staining the sky a bloody orange that made the shadows of the trees longer and more threatening, creating a perfect backdrop for the nightmare awaiting me. I could hear his muffled shouts, even before getting close to the entrance. The slurred voice of someone who had drunk way too much and lost any social filter they might have once had. I hugged my own body, trying to protect myself from the cold wind and shame, praying that no neighbor was at the window watching my private spectacle of humiliation. When I reached the iron gate, the image of him hit me with the force of a punch. Derek was leaning against the stone column, his shirt unbuttoned in a sloppy way, and his eyes red and glazed from alcohol. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe it was the contrast with the grandeur of the mansion, but the malice in his expression remained the same, intact and sharp. As soon as he saw me, he flashed a crooked, sarcastic smile, banging his hands on the metal bars as if he were a caged animal wanting to get out, or rather, wanting to get in to destroy the little I had achieved. "Look at her! The Cinderella from the trailer park thought she could hide from me in a castle," he yelled, his thick voice echoing in the deserted street, making my face burn with shame. "Thought I wouldn't find you, Kayla. You owe me explanations. You owe me money. You owe me the time I wasted on a boring fat girl like you." I approached the gate, keeping a safe distance, but close enough to smell the sour stench of cheap liquor radiating from him and invading the clean air of the wealthy neighborhood. My legs were shaking so much I needed to lean on the empty guard booth, but I forced my voice to come out, even if it sounded thin and broken. I told him to leave, told him this was my workplace, and that he had no right to show up like that, making a scene and putting my job at risk. I tried to be the strong woman I pretended to be in the mirror, but inside I was just the scared girl he manipulated for 2 years. "You don't boss me around, you useless thing," he snarled, switching from sarcasm to aggression in a second, kicking the gate hard and making a horrible metallic noise. "Open this crap right now. I want to come in. I want to see where you sleep. See if there's some rich old man funding you now, since I wasn't good enough." The fear of him jumping the wall or forcing entry paralyzed me for an instant, panic taking over my senses and making me dizzy. I looked back at the imposing house, imagining Ms. Veronica or the housekeeper calling the police, imagining my bags being thrown onto the street the next day. That image gave me a desperate courage, an anger I didn't know I had, born of the purest survival instinct. I got closer to the bars, staring into his bloodshot eyes, and said with all the firmness I could muster that if he didn't leave right that second, I would call the neighborhood security myself. "You're pathetic, Kayla." He spat on the ground near my feet, but I saw hesitation in his eyes, a flash of doubt at my unexpected resistance. "Stay there playing dollhouse. But don't forget you belong to me. Always have and always will. No one else is going to want the leftovers I left behind." He staggered away, cursing under his breath and kicking the air, going down the street toward the bus stop, taking with him the black cloud he had brought to my door. I stood there, holding the cold bars of the gate until my knuckles turned white, waiting for him to disappear around the corner, ensuring the danger had truly passed. When he finally vanished, I let out the air I was holding in a dry sob, feeling my strength drain away like water down a drain, leaving me hollow and trembling. The walk back to the house was worse than the walk there, because now I carried the certainty that my time there was over, that the dirt of my personal life had stained the pristine floor of that place. I felt dirty, exposed, as if his words were tattooed on my forehead for everyone to see. I entered through the service door, trying to compose myself, drying the stubborn tears that insisted on falling, and stopped in the middle of the garden to breathe, looking up at the immense facade of the mansion. It was in that moment, as I tried to control the trembling of my hands, that my eyes were drawn to the second-floor window, the window of her room. The heavy velvet curtain, which used to be always closed, was slightly parted, just a crack, but enough to reveal a motionless silhouette against the dim light of the lamp. Veronica Lucero was there, standing, watching everything. A chill ran through my entire body, much colder than the night wind, because I knew what that look meant. She had seen the scandal, had seen the drunk shouting, had seen my public humiliation, and my fragility laid bare at the gate of her fortress. Her judgment, which was already heavy, would now be unbearable, and I was absolutely certain that the next morning I would be fired without pity or mercy. I lowered my head, defeated, and walked inside, waiting for the final verdict, not knowing that what she had seen in that scene would awaken in her something very different from the contempt I expected. I spent the night awake, tossing and turning in the narrow bed of the service room, with my suitcase practically packed by the door, just waiting for the order to leave. When the sun rose, gray and shy behind the clouds, I was already in uniform, stomach in knots and heart pounding in my throat, mentally rehearsing the apology I knew would be useless. The housekeeper appeared at the kitchen door with her usual sour face, but there was something different in her eyes, a morbid curiosity perhaps, and said just 2 words that sounded like a death sentence. She called. I didn't need to ask who or for what. I wiped my sweaty hands on my apron, took a deep breath, searching for air that wouldn't come, and walked to the slaughter. Ms. Veronica's room was plunged in that habitual gloom she liked so much, with heavy curtains blocking the morning light, creating an environment that seemed isolated from the rest of the world. She was sitting in the same velvet armchair, motionless, hands crossed on her lap and the unreadable expression of a sphinx, staring fixably at me as I entered. I stopped near the door, lacking the courage to advance, feeling my legs shaking like leaves, and lowered my head, unable to face the woman I was sure was about to kick me out of her life. The silence in the room was absolute. Only the distant sound of traffic outside reminded me that life went on, indifferent to my despair. Ms. Veronica, I'm so sorry. I started to speak, words coming out rushed, stammered, a torrent of shame I couldn't contain. I swear I didn't know he would come. I never wanted to bring problems to your house. I'll get my things right now. You don't need to bother. I perfectly understand that. Shut your mouth, Kayla. Her voice cut my speech, not with a shout, but with an icy firmness that made me freeze on the spot, swallowing my tears. Stop apologizing as if you were a criminal. I didn't call you here to hear whining. I lifted my face, surprised, and saw that she wasn't looking at me with anger, but with an intensity that bordered on fury, only strangely, that fury didn't seem directed at me. She made an impatient gesture with her hand, indicating an upholstered chair in front of her, a place where I had never received permission to sit before. I obeyed, sitting on the edge of the seat, tense, ready to get up at any moment, and waited for the verdict, trying to understand what was happening behind those deep black eyes. That man, she began, pronouncing the word man, with visible disgust, as if it tasted like poison. Did he hurt you? Physically, I mean. Did he touch you yesterday? The question caught me so off guard that I took a moment to process, blinking confusedly as my mind tried to recalculate the root of that conversation that had gone completely off the script I imagined. I shook my head, feeling a lump in my throat, and said softly that no. He had only yelled, that the gate was locked. She let out a long sigh, almost a growl, and her shoulders relaxed minimally, as if an invisible tension had left her body, but the hard expression remained intact. Good, she said, and then leaned forward, the dark wood cane serving as support for her still fragile body. Listen well to what I'm going to say, girl, because I won't repeat it. I don't tolerate scenes at my door, that is true. I value my silence and my privacy above all else. But there is one thing I despise more than noise: cowardice. She paused dramatically, her eyes sweeping my face as if searching for invisible marks left by Derek's words. And I felt small, but at the same time welcomed in a strange and twisted way. I saw how you faced him, she continued, and for the first time, I saw a flash of respect shine deep in her gaze. You were shaking. You were terrified. I saw your white knuckles gripping the grate. But you didn't open the gate. You stood there and defended your space. Most people would have run or cowered, but you stayed. That shows character, Kayla. And character is the only thing money doesn't buy in this life. I felt hot tears run down my face without permission. Not of sadness this time, but of an overwhelming relief. As if someone had lifted a 200-pound weight off my back. No one had ever praised me for being strong. Derek always said I was weak, dependent, And hearing that from that powerful woman, whom I judged to be my tormentor, disarmed all my defenses. I tried to say thank you, but my voice didn't come out, so I just nodded, sobbing quietly, ashamed for crying in front of her. "Stop that. Dry that face," she ordered, but extended an embroidered linen handkerchief that was on the side table, offering it to me. "You are not leaving this house. On the contrary, I have already called the condo security and gave express orders. If that guy appears within 100 yards of this block, the police will be called immediately. And I have friends who are judges and police chiefs who would love to do me a favor. So believe me when I say he won't want to test my patience." I took the handkerchief, feeling the soft fabric and her mild perfume, and looked at Veronica Lucero with new eyes, seeing no longer the bitter boss, but a wounded lioness who, suddenly, had decided to extend her protection to me. That moved me in a deep way, awakening a gratitude that went beyond professional, touching an ancient need to be cared for, to be seen. That was when the moment happened that would change everything. She saw that I was still shaking, maybe from the shock of the news or the adrenaline dump, and in a slow, almost hesitant movement, she reached out and touched my hand, which rested on the arm of the chair. Her hand was warm, firm, the soft skin contrasting with the strength she exuded, and that simple touch sent an electric current up my arm, something that made my heart skip a beat. She didn't withdraw her hand immediately. We stayed there, connected by that gesture, me looking at her hand on mine, and her looking at me with an expression that softened, losing the hardness and revealing, for a second, the lonely woman living behind that armor. Time seemed to dilate, the silence of the room ceasing to be oppressive to become intimate, charged with a new, forbidden energy that neither of us knew how to name yet. "You are safe here, Kayla," she said, her voice in a lower tone, almost a husky whisper, and her fingers applied slight pressure on mine, an almost imperceptible caress, but one that shouted loud inside me. "As long as you are under my roof, no one touches you. Understood?" I looked up and met her eyes, and in that moment, the social barrier, the age difference, the employer and employee relationship, everything seemed to blur. There was a promise there, a silent pact sealed by the heat of that touch. I just nodded, hypnotized, feeling my face burn, and she withdrew her hand slowly, as if she had also felt the shock of that sudden proximity. I left the room minutes later, legs still wobbly, but for a totally different reason. I wasn't afraid of unemployment or Derek anymore. I was stunned by the sensation of Veronica Lucero's hand on mine, and with the frightening certainty that, on that gray morning, something dangerous and incredibly sweet had just been born between us. The days that followed that morning in the bedroom were marked by a silent but overwhelming transformation in the dynamics of that house. It wasn't an abrupt change, like a switch being flipped. It was more like the sunrise, slow and inevitable, dissipating the cold shadows that previously inhabited every corner of the mansion and my heart. Veronica kept her promise of protection, and the condo security was reinforced. But the real shielding happened within the walls, where the barrier between employer and employee began to dissolve like sugar in hot water. That woman, previously inaccessible and sharp, began to allow my presence not just as a physical necessity, but as desired company, and that scared me as much as it fascinated me. Her physical recovery advanced by leaps and bounds, driven perhaps by a new motivation I didn't dare decipher. The physical therapy sessions, which were once battlefields full of complaints and groans of impatience, became moments of silent complicity. I watched her grit her teeth and sweat to take another step without the cane. And when she succeeded, the first gaze she sought was mine, waiting for that nod of approval I gave with a shy smile. It was intoxicating to see the most powerful woman I ever knew seeking validation in my eyes, and I found myself craving those moments, feeling a silly pride warming my chest in a dangerous way. Our evenings, which I previously spent alone in the service room or the kitchen, changed scenery to the library, her favorite room. It was an imposing place, smelling of old paper and noble wood, where she spent hours reading or listening to classical music. At first, I just stayed nearby, ready to serve tea or fetch a book, but gradually, she started inviting me to sit in the armchair next to her. "Sit down, Kayla. Stop hovering over me like a ghost," she would say. But the tone no longer had the venom of before. It was an invitation, almost a request disguised as an order. And there we stayed, sometimes in silence, each with our thoughts, listening to the rain hit the window or the sound of a cello filling the air. It was on these nights that I met the real Veronica Lucero, the woman behind the legend. She started talking, first about impersonal things, about the books she read, about art history, subjects that were Greek to me, but in her voice sounded like poetry. I listened fascinated, absorbing every word, enchanted by the sharp intelligence and vast culture she possessed. I felt like a student before a master, but she never made me feel ignorant. On the contrary, she explained with patience, and when I asked a simple question, she stopped everything to answer with an attention that made me feel like the most important person in the world. But what really made my stomach do flips weren't the intellectual conversations. It was the silences. There were moments when conversation died, and the only sound was our breathing, and I felt the weight of her gaze on me. It wasn't that analytical look from the first day. It was something warmer, denser. Several times I looked up from my lap and caught her watching me with a soft, almost melancholic expression, focused on my face, my mouth, or my hands. As soon as our eyes met, she would look away quickly, returning attention to the book with a nervous throat clearing, and I felt my face burn, heart racing like an offbeat drum. I tried to rationalize, tried to tell myself it was neediness, that I was confusing gratitude with attraction. After all, I had just come out of a traumatic heterosexual relationship. I had never looked at a woman that way before. But the body doesn't know how to lie, and my body reacted to her presence in a way I couldn't control. The smell of her perfume, a woody and floral mix that stayed impregnated in the sheets when I made the bed, became my favorite scent, something I inhaled deeply when no one was looking, seeking a connection I didn't have the courage to verbalize. The tension grew in small accidental touches, which seemed to happen more and more frequently. Passing the teacup, our fingers brushed, and the electric discharge was so real we almost dropped the china. Helping her up from the armchair, my body stayed glued to hers for a second longer than necessary, and I could feel her breathing change, get shorter, just like mine. They were seconds of a forbidden dance, where desire hung in the air, thick and undeniable. But neither of us had the courage to take the first step to cross the abyssal line separating us. There was also fear. Fear of her regretting it. Fear of me imagining things. Fear of the age and social class difference. Who was I, the poor and broken caregiver, to desire the great Dr. Veronica Lucero? I felt unworthy of that affection, as if I were stealing moments of happiness that didn't belong to me. Sometimes, I looked in the service bathroom mirror and saw a different woman, with flushed skin, brighter eyes, a woman who was blooming under the disguised care of that demanding boss, and that terrified me because I knew everything good in my life usually didn't last long. On a rainy Friday, we were watching an old movie in the living room. Lights off, only the glow of the television illuminating our faces. In a sad scene, I saw a solitary tear run down her face. Without thinking, moved by an impulse that came straight from the soul, I reached out and wiped the tear with my thumb. Her skin was soft, warm. She turned her face to my hand, closing her eyes for an instant, and sighed. A sound that seemed like a cry for help and a surrender at the same time. I froze, heart in my throat, waiting for her to push me away, but she just tilted her face slightly, nuzzling her cheek in my palm. "You are a good girl, Kayla," she whispered, opening her eyes and staring at me with a depth that disarmed me entirely. Too good for this cruel world, and too good for me. I wanted to say no, that she was wonderful, that she had saved me. but the words got stuck. That moment was the peak of our intimacy so far, a mutual acknowledgement that something was happening, something that could no longer be ignored. I withdrew my hand slowly, feeling the loss of physical contact like physical pain, and said goodnight to go to sleep, running from the intensity of that atmosphere before I did something crazy, like kiss her right there on the sofa. I went to my room with my head spinning, happy and terrified in equal measure. I was falling in love, that was a fact, and for the first time, it seemed the feeling was reciprocal. But life, with its cruel irony, was already preparing the blow that would bring me back to the hard reality of my past. While I dreamed of Veronica's black eyes, my body was already starting to give the first signs that I wasn't alone in that room, and that Derek's ghost had left an inheritance I could never have predicted. The fragile bubble of happiness I was floating in burst not with a bang, but with a silent and overwhelming nausea that turned my world upside down. It started subtly, like a tiredness I attributed to the heavy routine of taking care of the house and Ms. Veronica, but soon evolved into a physical repugnance I couldn't control. Waking up in the morning, which used to be the moment I looked forward to seeing her face, became a battle against my own stomach, with a metallic taste in my mouth and a dizziness that made the service room spin like an out-of-control carousel. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was stress, that it was the different food. Anything but the truth my body was trying to scream. The smell of coffee, which was always my favorite aroma to start the day, suddenly turned into my worst enemy. On that fateful Tuesday, I entered the kitchen to prepare the boss's breakfast, and as soon as the steam from the filter rose, I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to run to the back bathroom, holding back vomit with my hand. I stayed there, kneeling on the cold floor, shaking and sweating cold, while the housekeeper passed in the hallway grumbling about the delay. I washed my face with cold water, brushed my teeth hard until my gums bled, trying to get rid of that bitter taste, and went back to work with a forced smile, praying not to faint. Serving breakfast to Ms. Veronica was an ordeal. The silver tray, loaded with fruit, bread, and scrambled eggs, seemed to weigh a ton, and the smell of eggs turned my insides with every step I took toward the room. When I entered, she was already awake, reading the newspaper in bed, and as soon as she saw me, she frowned, her eagle eyes immediately detecting that something was out of place. I tried to maintain posture, place the tray on her legs delicately, but my hands were shaking so much the dishes clattered, betraying my deplorable state. "You're pale, Kayla," she observed, setting the newspaper aside and analyzing me with that clinical look that missed nothing. "And you're sweating cold. Don't tell me you caught some virus. I can't afford to get sick now that my recovery is going so well." "It's nothing, Ms. Veronica. I think I just ate something that didn't sit well last night," I lied, looking away to the window, feeling guilt corrode my chest for lying to the only person who cared about me. "I already took some medicine. It'll pass soon. Do you want me to open the curtains?" She didn't seem convinced but didn't insist, returning her attention to the plate, although I noticed she was watching me sideways while I tidied the room. The morning dragged on in slow torture. Every time I had to bend down to pick something up or make a more abrupt movement, the world darkened at the edges of my vision. I felt weak, drained, as if a leech were sucking my vitality, and fear began to set in. Fear of being truly sick, fear of not being able to work, fear of losing that refuge I had found. At lunchtime, the challenge was even greater. The cook prepared baked fish with shrimp sauce, a dish Ms. Veronica loved, but whose smell flooded the entire house, invading my nostrils like toxic gas. I tried to hold my breath while serving the table on the veranda, but it was impossible. The strong aroma of the sea mixed with garlic made my stomach tie a blind knot, and I had to excuse myself abruptly, running to the kitchen under the astonished gaze of the boss. I returned minutes later, pale as paper, after having vomited only water and bile in the service bathroom. Ms. Veronica hadn't touched the food. She was turned toward the door, waiting for me with an expression that mixed irritation and genuine concern she tried to disguise. I approached, apologizing profusely, saying it was just a passing indisposition, but she raised her hand, asking for silence. "Sit here now," she ordered, pointing to the wicker chair in front of her. "You are not going to work in this state. Look at you. You look like you're going to drop dead at any moment. Have you eaten anything today, girl?" I wasn't hungry, Ms. Veronica," I confessed, sitting on the edge of the chair, feeling the world spin slowly. "But I'm fine, I swear. I just need a glass of water." She poured the water herself, with hands that were still recovering firmness, and pushed the glass toward me. I drank in big gulps, feeling the cold liquid calm the fire in my stomach, but the weakness persisted. Veronica kept watching me in silence for a long time, and I saw a shadow of doubt cross her eyes, as if she were putting together a puzzle whose pieces she didn't quite have yet. "Have you been taking care of yourself, Kayla?" she asked suddenly, her voice low and husky. "I mean, outside of here. Have you been to the doctor? Have you been eating right? You've lost weight, your face is gaunt, but at the same time you seem swollen." The question caught me off guard. I hadn't been to a doctor in years. The public system took forever, and I never had money for private. I shook my head negatively, feeling immense shame at my own negligence. She sighed, shaking her head with disapproval, and said she would schedule an appointment for me with her family doctor the following week because she didn't want a zombie taking care of her. Her generosity, even wrapped in criticism, made me want to cry, which seemed to be my natural state lately, either nauseous or teary. In the afternoon during the exercise session, the worst happened. I was helping her walk around the living room, serving as support in case she lost her balance. Suddenly, a black dizziness hit me, much stronger than the others. My legs lost strength, my knees buckled, and I started to fall. I didn't hit the floor because I felt arms catch me, not the strong arms of a man, but hers. Veronica Lucero, who could barely support herself months ago, used her own body and the wall to catch me, preventing my collapse. "Kayla!" she shouted, and the panic in her voice was the only thing that kept me conscious. I smelled her perfume very close, felt her breath on my face as she held me with surprising strength. "Breathe, girl. Stay with me." We stayed there for a few seconds, me practically passed out in the arms of the woman I was supposed to be caring for. When my vision cleared, I saw her face inches from mine, her eyes wide with fear. She helped me sit on the sofa, cursing softly at my stubbornness, and ran to get rubbing alcohol for me to smell. While I sat there, trying to make the world stop spinning, a question, a terrible and cold suspicion, began to sprout in the back of my mind, coming from the most rational place I had left. I started doing the math mentally, counting on trembling fingers while she was out of the room. February, March. Mardi Gras, the office party where Derek humiliated me. The last night we spent together before the breakup. That night when he was drunk and insistent. And I, too tired to fight, gave in. My heart stopped for a second and then started beating in a frantic, painful rhythm. My period. I didn't remember the last time it came. With the confusion of the breakup, the job change, the stress of the new routine, I simply hadn't noticed. But now, with the nausea, the dizziness, the easy crying, the pieces fit together with a terrifying click. When Veronica returned to the room with the small bottle of alcohol and a look full of care, I could barely face her. I needed to go to a pharmacy. I needed to know. Because if that was true, if my nightmare had become reality, I would not only be carrying the child of a man I despised, but I would be about to lose the woman I was starting to love. I asked permission to go to the pharmacy with the lame excuse that I needed to buy a specific painkiller for my supposed migraine, but the truth is, I was going to buy the sentence of my own trial. I walked through the tree-lined streets of the wealthy neighborhood like a fugitive, looking sideways, afraid of running into someone I knew, although no one there knew who I was. I entered the first drugstore I found, the cold air conditioning drying the cold sweat on my forehead, and went straight to the pregnancy test shelf, grabbing the most expensive and supposedly most reliable box, hiding it among other random products in the basket. The clerk scanned my items with an automatic smile, not knowing that that pink and white box had the power to destroy the only good thing I had built in recent years. I returned to the mansion with my heart pounding in my throat, entering through the service door and running to my room before anyone intercepted me. I locked the door, something I never did, and went to the small bathroom, my hands shaking so much I tore the packaging with difficulty, dropping the instructions on the wet floor. I performed the mechanical procedure, feeling deep shame about my own body, my own history, and placed the test on the synthetic marble sink, staring at it as if it were a ticking time bomb about to explode. It was just 3 minutes, the instructions said, but it felt like 3 centuries where my whole life flashed before my eyes. The poor childhood, the architecture dreams I never realized, the abusive relationship with Derek, and finally, Veronica Lucero's face. When the time was up and I had the courage to look at the display, the world stopped. 2 lines, 2 red lines, sharp, undeniable, screaming in my face that the nightmare was real. I was pregnant. Pregnant by a man who hated me, who humiliated me, a man I wanted to erase from my memory. I felt my legs give way and slid down the wall to the floor, hugging my knees, trying to stifle the scream of despair rising in my throat. The crying came violent, convulsive, the crying of someone watching the future crumble before it even began. How was I going to take care of a child? How was I going to explain this to Ms. Veronica? She was going to fire me, I was sure. Who would want a pregnant, single caregiver linked to a problematic ex-boyfriend? I don't know how long I stayed there, sobbing on the cold floor, lost in my own misery, until I heard knocks on the bedroom door. They weren't the heavy knocks of the housekeeper. They were light, rhythmic taps, made with the tip of a cane. I froze, holding my breath, praying she would go away. But the doorknob turned. I had forgotten that in that house, there were no locks the owner couldn't open. The door opened slowly and Veronica Lucero entered, leaning on her cane, her worried expression turning into shock seeing me curled up on the bathroom floor. "Kayla?" she called, voice full of urgency, forgetting any formality. "My God, girl, what happened? Are you hurt?" She didn't wait for an answer. Ignoring her own pains and limitations, she let go of the cane, which fell with a dry clatter on the rug, and lowered herself with difficulty to get on my level. Seeing that woman, who always maintained the posture of an untouchable queen, kneel on a maid's bathroom floor to help me, was the final blow to my resistance. I collapsed completely, weeping copiously, unable to formulate a sentence, unable to hide the test box lying next to me, face up, betraying my sin. Veronica followed my gaze and saw the test. I waited for the judgment, waited for the revulsion, waited for her to get up and leave in disgust at my irresponsibility. But she did none of that. She looked at the result, took a deep breath, and then looked at me with compassion so deep, it hurt more than any scream. Without saying a word, she opened her arms and pulled me to her. I buried my face in her shoulder, smelling lavender in the softness of her silk blouse, and cried everything I had to cry, wetting her expensive clothes with my tears of fear and guilt. "Shh, calm down," she whispered, stroking my hair with a tenderness I didn't know, rocking us slightly as if I were a child. "Breathe, Kayla. You are not alone. I am here. Everything is going to be okay. Do you hear me? Everything is going to be okay." That hug was the safe harbor I never had, and the proximity of our bodies, the heat of her skin against mine, began to change the nature of my crying. Despair gave way to an urgent need for contact, for fusion. I pulled away minimally, just enough to look at her face, and saw she was crying too. Silent tears running down that beautiful face marked by life. Our noses almost touched, and the air between us became electric, charged with all the unspoken words of the last few weeks, all the averted glances in the library. "I'm a disaster, Miss Veronica," I whispered, my voice hoarse, lips trembling inches from hers. "I ruined everything." "You didn't ruin anything," she replied, and her voice dropped to a deeper, hypnotic tone, while her eyes went down to my mouth and back to my eyes, dark with desire and protection. "You're just human, and you are the most precious thing that has entered this house in years. I won't let anything bad happen to you. I promise." The promise hung in the air, mixed with the unbearable tension pulling us toward each other like magnets. I don't know who moved first. Maybe we moved together, guided by an instinct stronger than reason, stronger than fear, stronger than social rules. My eyes closed when I felt her lips touch mine. It wasn't a shy or hesitant kiss. It was a kiss of desperate need, a kiss of someone drowning and finally finding air. Her mouth was soft, warm, experienced, and she kissed me with a hunger that made me dizzy, her hand holding the back of my neck firmly, bringing me closer, while my hand sought her waist, clutching the fabric of her blouse as if it were my only anchor. The taste of our tears mixed, salty and sweet, sealing a silent pact on that cold floor. The world outside, the ex-boyfriend, the pregnancy, the money, everything disappeared. There was only Veronica, her touch, her tongue, the salvation she offered me. But then, the sound of something falling, perhaps the test itself I bumped with my knee, broke the trance. We pulled apart panting, eyes wide, reality knocking at the door with the force of a tidal wave. I looked at her mouth, swollen and red from our kiss, and then looked at the pregnancy test on the floor, with the 2 pink lines mocking us. I had just kissed the woman of my life at the exact moment I found out I was expecting a child from my worst nightmare. And by Veronica's frightened yet determined look, I knew that kiss wasn't the end of anything, but the beginning of a storm that could destroy us or save us forever. This story continues in part 2. Stay tuned for the emotional conclusion of Kayla and Veronica's journey,